Hello and welcome to Topic 1, Lecture 1. And in this lecture, we're going to be defining the formal criminal justice system. Okay, so there are two lectures for Topic 1. In this lecture, you're going to be learning about the steps in the formal criminal justice process. And in the next lecture, you're going to be learning about the criminal justice funnel and the factors that cause the winnowing effect, okay? And so in the first lecture, we're going to learn about all the steps in the criminal justice process. But as we know, and as you'll read in this chapter, not all offenders make it through all of the steps in the process. And so that's what's known as the criminal justice funnel. And then we're going to talk about why we have that funnel and what are the factors that cause that winnowing effect. So what is the criminal justice system? What is it comprised of? And so when we're talking about the criminal justice system, or as I sometimes refer to it as the CJS, you'll see that throughout the course of the semester. When we're talking about the criminal justice system, we're talking about two major elements, okay? And so the first major element is the process that the offender passes through. In other words, that there are certain stages and steps that an offender could potentially pass through, right? And so that's what we're going to be learning about in this lecture. The police procedure, the prosecutorial stage, the trial stage, the correctional stage, okay? And so the criminal justice system does refer to those stages and the process that's associated with those when an offender works through those particular stages of the criminal justice system. But the criminal justice system also refers to governmental agencies, okay? And so there are specific governmental agencies that are charged with enforcing the law at each of these steps within stages within the criminal justice system, okay? And so that when it comes to police procedures, which we'll be learning about first in this lecture, that you have law enforcement agencies that are charged with enforcing the law at each of these stages, okay? And so as you're going to learn this semester, law enforcement agencies are, at the local level, like the Milwaukee Police Department. We have state law enforcement. We have federal law enforcement, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, okay? And all of those are governmental agencies that are, charged with, the processes associated with these different stages. The Office of the Prosecutor, the District Attorney, U.S. attorneys that work for the federal government, that is a particular agency, the court system, the correctional system, etc. Okay? And so on the one hand, the criminal justice system refers to the specific stages that an offender goes through. However, it also refers to the governmental agencies that comprise the criminal justice system. So as I already noted, this lecture is dedicated to learning about the formal criminal justice process. And that process is the process that takes an offender through a series of decision points, okay? And that there's basically sort of like, criminologists and those who study crime and criminal justice, they identify what these key decision points are within this process, okay? And so, in this first chapter and in this lecture, we're going to be, looking at and learning more about those key decisions that take place at each point in this process. And as I mentioned earlier, that process is often seen as a criminal justice assembly line. So, like, if you've ever worked in a factory, that an assembly line is, where one person does one thing and then they pass it to the next person and they do something, and then they pass it to the next person on the assembly line and they do something. And so this process is sometimes regarded as this criminal justice assembly line, where at each point a decision is made, and that decision often leads to being passed on to the next entity, the next agency that's in that assembly line. Now, as I also mentioned, very few people are processed through all of these steps, okay? And so in the next lecture, we're going to be learning about this thing called the criminal justice funnel, that there are many crimes that take place in the United States, but that those crimes are, a lot of them aren't solved, an offender is never identified, and even when that offender is identified, that oftentimes they're not charged, or, that they plea out and they don't ever go to trial, etc. And so we'll be learning about this criminal justice funnel and the features or the factors that contribute to that funneling. And so we're going to be learning about the courtroom work group and the criminal justice wedding cake, okay? And so that's what we are going to be learning about. So let's now turn our sights to focusing specifically on the criminal justice process. So when I teach about the criminal justice, the formal criminal justice process, I like to teach it through the lens of The Night Of. And The Night Of is a great HBO limited series that came out in 2016. And I know there are a lot of good crime shows out there, and I saw from your self introductions that a lot of people in class like to watch crime documentaries and crime television series. But I think this is a really outstanding one because I think it does a really realistic job of portraying the actual criminal justice process in the United States. It's also very well acted. There's some really good actors in it as well. So I encourage you to watch it if you have HBO or to rent it if you don't. But let me tell you a little bit about the show so you can kind of understand what it's about and how I'm using it as an example for this lecture. This show is about this man here, his name is Nazir Khan. Okay. And Nazir Khan is played by the actor Riz Ahmed. You might be familiar with him. He's a British actor and a British rapper. And he's most recently been in a great movie called The Sound of Metal, which is about going deaf. But anyways, Nazir Khan is a Pakistani American. He was born in the United States, and he lives a really sheltered life with his family in Queens. And so he's a young man. He's in college, but he really doesn't have a lot of opportunities to do a lot of fun things because he's really sheltered because of his more conservative family life. But one night that he gets an opportunity he's invited to a party in Manhattan, and he's super excited about it. So him and his friend are going to go to Manhattan to go to this party, but his friend bails on him, and he's really disappointed. And so Nazir Khan steals his father's taxi cab and drives it into the city to get himself to the party. He's not very familiar with Manhattan, and since he's driving a taxi cab, people keep sort of hailing him like, hey, take me to my, where I want to go. And, he gets confused and he's not stopping for anybody. But then finally, this young woman, her name is Andrea Cornish, she's here, that she waves him down. And Nazir Khan, it gets excited. She's very attractive. He's really in the city to have a good time. So he picks her up and then takes her. He asks where she wants to go, and she says she wants to go to her apartment. Does he, does he kind of want a party or whatever? And he's like, yeah, sure, I'm down with it. So they go to her apartment, and it doesn't turn out well. That they start doing drugs and drinking a lot, and Nazir Khan is not a kid, a young man who's used to this kind of partying lifestyle. So they get kind of wild. They have sex, and then the next morning, Nazir wakes up in the kitchen completely passed out. And he wakes up and he's like, oh shit, sorry, excuse my language. He's like, I got to get out of here, right? I mean, I took my dad's cab. He doesn't know. I need to get out of here. So he goes upstairs to say goodbye to Andrea. And when he goes up there, he turns the light on and he sees that she's stabbed to death in her bed. She's covered with blood. And then he freaks out. Okay. He doesn't know what happens. Okay. And so he runs from the apartment. Then he realizes that he left his jacket in the apartment. He breaks back into the apartment to get the jacket. He cuts his hand. He looks at the table and there's a knife that they were using the night before to play this like dangerous, risky game where they're like poking themselves in their hands or whatever. He grabs the knife because he's like, oh shit, that looks bad. And then he takes off and he gets in his car. He drives away and he's picked up by the cops. Okay. And at that point, there's this process of, he gets picked up. Then there's an alert that somebody's been murdered. It's Andrea Cornish. And then basically the series unfolds from there. And so Nazir Khan, it's never really clear whether he's guilty or not of this crime. But he's arrested, and then he gets a private attorney who's played by John Turturro, great actor, who's been in, Do the Right Thing and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And he basically is a kind of a lawyer for hire. And he just decides that he's going to defend Nazir Khan against these charges. Here in the corner here is Helen Weiss. She is one of the district attorneys for Manhattan, and she wants to hold this kid, Nazir Khan, accountable, this young adult accountable for the murder. And this is the hard-boiled detective Box, who is basically doing all that he can to get Nazir Khan to confess and to hold him accountable for this crime that they all think that they committed. So it's a wonderful show, and it's a good example of the process in the criminal justice formal process. So let's move on to take a look at the steps, and then we'll sort of work in the night of, as we're talking about these different steps within the formal criminal justice process. So we're going to be using the night of to talk about the stages in the criminal justice process. And so what are those stages? Well, your textbook breaks those stages of the formal criminal justice process into 4 stages. The first stage is what is known as the police procedures stage. The second stage is what's known as the prosecutorial stage. The third stage is the trial stage. And then the fourth is the correctional procedure stage. And then within each of these stages are particular steps that a potential offender could work their way through. Okay. Now, in this lecture and also in your textbook, I want you to really think about and keep mind and maybe take notes of these different stages, because this week we have an extra credit quiz. Okay. I'll tell you more about the extra credit quiz at the end of the lecture, but it's an extra credit quiz that tests your knowledge of these 4 stages and the steps within these stages of the formal criminal justice process. So the first stage is the police procedures stage, okay? And let me just put up the 4 steps that are associated with the police procedure stage. Those are: first, initial contact; second, investigation; third, arrest; and fourth, putting somebody into custody, okay? So keep those in mind. But I want to start by saying that police are basically the gatekeepers of the criminal justice process, right? That police are responsible for, learning about crimes. And so that when a crime is committed, oftentimes people will call the police saying that a crime has been committed, their garage has been broken into, they're victim of assault, whatever it is. And sometimes police will just be on the beat, driving their cars. I live in Milwaukee and River West. We've got bike cops all the time. And so they may come upon a crime, okay? And so it's really the police that are the gatekeepers, that if the police never find out about a crime, if a crime is never reported to the police, then that crime doesn't really get into the formal criminal justice process. Also, as we're going to see, that police have a lot of judgment and discretion in playing out their role. Okay, and so you'll learn as a part of the police stage of police procedures that there are decisions that police make along the way about whether or not they are going to, the decisions about whether they have an initial contact, right? They may be reactive policing, where they only know about a crime if somebody draws it to their attention. Once they have an initial contact with an individual, they'll choose whether or not to take action, okay? And so, when it comes to that first step of initial contact, that, as I mentioned, that police may learn about a crime because of an observation that they make. That may be because a victim contacts the police department. An informant may contact the police department, or police may put informants in because they think a crime is taking place, and that the informant will inform out to them. Okay, and so that they have an initial contact. Somebody might just go over to the police office and confess, right? And so there's that initial contact that takes place. In the night of, you see a picture there, that's Nazir Khan, that after he is in the apartment, wakes up and realizes that Adria Cornish is dead. He gets in his father's cab and he drives away. And he's still drunk and on drugs, right? And so it's no surprise that he gets pulled over by the cops. It's like 4 a.m., 5 a.m. in the morning. He makes a turn without his turn signal. He gets pulled over. And that's the initial contact that the police have, right, with Nazir Khan. They ask him to roll down his window. He does, and he stinks of alcohol and drugs, right? As the cop in the show says like, it sounds like, a brewery just like exploded on you, and then they get him out, and then it's clear that he's drunk, right? So they make that initial contact, and then they do that investigation of that initial contact. The investigation is, seeing that he is drunk, and then they, decide to arrest him. Okay. And so, the investigation in that instance is just the investigation. It could be a few minutes, a few seconds. Obviously, he's drunk. They give him a breathalyzer. He blows above the legal limit, and then they're going to take action. But investigations can be short like that, or they can take months, right? That law enforcement might think a crime is going on, and they'll take months to investigate before they actually take action. And even when they do investigate, that they could make a decision to not arrest that individual. And that's actually what happens in the night of. That as they are investigating this drunk driving incident, they actually get a call saying that there was a murder in the neighborhood, Andrea Cornish. They don't know it's Andrea Cornish yet. So they're not exactly sure what to do with Nazir Khan. They almost let him go, but they're like, hey, we can't let this drunk guy drive around in a cab. So they just throw him in the back of the squad car, but he's not officially arrested. Okay. So that it's later in the episode that he actually gets arrested. After they investigate the death of Andrea Cornish, they're like, shoot, this guy's still in our car. They take him down to the police office, police station, and they're about to release him, right? And then they start patting him down, and they find that knife that he took from the scene, a bloody knife. And at that point, not only do they arrest him, but they take him into custody as well, okay? Because there's probable cause for that arrest and custody. And at that point, he becomes a custodian of the police, okay? And so, you'll read more about it in the textbook, but police stage, initial contact, investigation, arrest, and then custody. Stage 2 is the prosecutorial stage, okay? And so once an individual is arrested and taken into custody by the police, they're basically the next step is that they get sort of passed on to the prosecutor's office. And the photo there is Helen Weiss, the prosecutor from the borough of Manhattan, who's wanting to charge Nazir Khan with the crime of first-degree intentional homicide. And so there's many steps in the prosecutorial stage, okay? Let me go ahead and put these up, and we will talk about each of these separately. And so the main thing, or the first thing that the prosecutor does, is they decide whether or not this individual that is apprehended in custody of the police, whether or not formal charges should be rendered against this individual in custody. And so the first step is charging, the decision to charge somebody with a crime. And if you're going to charge somebody with a crime, you need to have probable cause. You basically have to say that based on the evidence, it's reasonable to believe that this individual actually committed this crime. It's not the same level of proof that you need to find somebody guilty, but you just have to say it's reasonable based on the evidence that this person committed a crime. Now, a lot of times prosecutors will not charge somebody with a crime. Just because you're arrested and taken into custody doesn't mean that you're charged with a crime. And that's because the prosecutor might decide that there's just not enough evidence to proceed. And that is what is referred to as nulli prosequi. That is that the prosecutor is unwilling to pursue. Okay. And that basically means that they are not going to charge an individual with a crime because they don't feel like they're going to win this case if they charge this person and it goes to trial. Okay. And so in the case of Nazir Khan, he does get charged. So once you're charged, the prosecutor says that they want to charge you, that there's a check on the power of the prosecutor. And that's what's known as the preliminary hearing or the grand jury. That we'll learn more about that moving forward in the semester. But just say that the prosecutor alone cannot charge somebody with a crime. Either a judge has to say that they agree that there's probable cause to sustain this charge, or a grand jury, an actual jury of citizens, come together, and based on the evidence, they say, yep, based on the evidence that the prosecutor presented, that we're going to indict this individual, that they should be charged with a crime. Okay. Once a person is charged, they're brought to the courtroom to be arraigned. And at that point, the individual is, brought to the courtroom, that they are deemed competent and understanding the charges that are being leveled against them. That there is a determination of whether or not this person should receive bail. If they are danger to the community, that it could be that bail is going to be denied. That's what happened with Nazir Khan. He's held without bail because he is arrested for first-degree intentional homicide. Or bail could be leveled. If you make it, you get to go free, and not free, but you're not detained, and that you can prepare for your own trial outside of jail detention. If you can't make bail, which you're going to find in this class is the vast majority of people can't make bail, that they sit in jail detained while they wait trial. Okay. And so after arraignment, when you're told what the charges are and a bail is set, then the decision is made to prepare for trial. Okay. So you get a defense attorney, John Turturro for Nazir Khan, and then the prosecutor begins preparing for trial. And it's at that point that both parties can come together and say, look, we want to avoid trial, but we want you to plead guilty, right? And so that's what happened in the night of, that the prosecutor begins negotiating with Nazir Khan's attorney and tries to determine whether or not that whether or not Nazir Khan is willing to accept a plea agreement. They go down from first-degree intentional homicide to manslaughter with a mandatory 10-year sentence. And they put that deal on the table. And I won't tell you whether or not that deal is accepted. Okay. So that's the prosecutorial stage: charging, preliminary hearing, arraignment, bail detention, plea bargaining. Okay. And you're going to see that, when we get to the criminal justice funnel, that many people plead out and don't ever go to trial. The next stage is what's known as the trial stage, stage 3. And the trial stage has several steps: the trial, the sentencing, and then the appeal. There are 3 steps, okay? And spoiler alert, I know I said that I was going to tell you whether he accepted the plea agreement, but he does not accept the plea agreement, and he decides to go to trial. And John Turturro makes an attempt to defend him, even though he is completely unprepared as a defense attorney. And so in the trial that you'll read in the textbook, that you have a choice, that you have a constitutional right to a jury trial, but you can waive that right and have a trial in front of a judge. It's at the trial where the guilt of the individual is determined, okay? And so that either the jury or the judge determines that this person is guilty of the charges that they've been of the crime that they've been charged with beyond a reasonable doubt, or the jury can acquit the individual, or the judge as well, and say that this individual, that there's not enough evidence to find this individual guilty, and so they would render a verdict of not guilty. After a verdict is rendered, a sentence will be given, and that is usually the job of the judge to sentence the individual, although, as you're going to learn, there are guidelines that the state uses to shape what the appropriate sentence is. The sentence can be from time served to, a fine, all the way up to the death penalty in the United States. After an individual is sentenced, you get a right to an appeal, a post-conviction. Now, if you're found not guilty, that's it. It doesn't, the process stops there. The prosecution, the state, cannot appeal a verdict of not guilty, okay? That's prohibited by the double jeopardy clause within the Fifth Amendment. But if you are found guilty, everybody who's found guilty has a right to one appeal. And that's basically where they try to bring to the court the attention of some of the errors that were made in the trial, basically arguing that the guilty conviction was wrong because there were errors within the trial, okay? And so that they can look at, was there a lack of fairness, were rights violated, etc., okay? And so those are the 3 steps within the trial stage. This final stage in the formal criminal justice process is stage 4, correctional procedures. And in there are 3 steps: correctional treatment, release, and post-release, okay? In the story of the night of, that this story is much of the story is about the transformation that Nazir Khan goes through as a part of his interaction with the correctional system. In particular, as he's detained in jail at Rikers Island, pending his trial. And he's taken under the wing of a brutal individual, Freddie Knight, who's played by the Michael Kenneth Williams, who played Omar in the great series The Wire. And it's really about the detrimental and harmful effects that prison has on Nazir Khan, or at jail at Rikers Island, as he basically tries to prevent himself from being killed while he is in custody. And so reading about the correctional stage is once you're sentenced, then if you're sentenced to some sort of correctional treatment, then that's where the correctional stage takes over. So if you're sentenced to probation, then you have a probation officer, and it's a part of the correctional treatment, because if you fail the terms of your probation, you can end up in prison. That if you are sentenced to a year or less, that you'll be sentenced to confinement within a jail, or more than a year for serious offenses, you're going to be in secure confinement in a state penitentiary, where most people are, or in the federal penitentiary. People ultimately usually get released from prison, and so the next step is, if you're released on parole, then there are provisions that the correctional treatment deals with at that point of release. There can be some treatment for those in post-release to make sure that they are able to get back into the community properly, find a job, and also prevent recidivism. And so that's the last stage within the correctional procedures. And it's a really brilliant part of the night of, because we see the detrimental effects of that correctional treatment within the story. All right, so that's a brief overview of the formal criminal justice process. You'll be learning about this throughout the course of the semester, and also make sure you read Chapter 1, because it goes into more detail on each of those steps. Now, to test your knowledge of the steps in the process, you get an extra credit opportunity this week that gives you the opportunity to self-test yourself on the steps of the criminal justice process. It's a drag and drop quiz, and so you'll see the different stages and the steps within the stages, and you drag and drop those stages into the appropriate order. You can't use your notes or textbooks, and I mean you could, but you can take it as many times as you want. And so everybody who gets it in the correct order, right? You have a limited amount of time to do it. Everybody gets it in the correct order. Even if you take multiple attempts, you'll get 5 extra credit points. However, and this is where not using notes or books comes in while you're taking the quiz, the quicker you do it and the less attempts that you take, the more extra credit points you can earn. So as it says there, the first 5 students that do it in the least amount of time get it with the least amount of attempts and in the least amount of times will win an additional 5 extra credit points. So you can earn up to 10 extra credit points. Okay, that's it for me. Thanks for paying attention, and I'll talk to you again soon.